Okay, this is a look at Dr. Bryan Wallace's work. The main site I will be dealing with is the Farce of Physics, and that's at this website here. So first thing I want to do is look at the bio of Dr. Bryan Wallace. Lost him. There we go. Dr. Bryan Wallace, sadly now deceased. He was born February 8th, 1933 and passed away at age 64. So, main thing he's dealing with is radar testing of relative velocity of light in space, and his book is called The Farce of Physics. Bryan G. Wallace of St. Petersburg, Florida, died in March 1997, aged 64. He generated much local publicity for his efforts and became known internationally after he read papers in Leningrad in 1989 and 1991. The first two in the recent series of Russian dissident meetings following NPA members highly valued his dedication and his congenial nature. So he's rebelling against Einstein's relativity. So this is the group of scientists who are opposed to Einstein's relativity, and this is example one of the people. One of the problems we get is it takes a very long time to actually study all this physics, and by the time you actually come to a conclusion that Einstein is wrong, you are getting quite on in years, you're getting quite old. So you don't have much time. Got to learn the physics. It takes a long time. By then you've got to come to a decision whether you believe in Einstein or not, and when you come to a decision you believe Einstein is wrong, well, you don't have that many working years left really in your life. So let's get back to it. The Serenado is many scientists are gathering evidence from experiments, etc., that Einstein is wrong. But they find it difficult to publish in respectable journals. The ideal is that an article should get peer-reviewed and published in a respectable journal. That's an ideal. So this is probably what they tell the public, the physics people, the scientists and so forth, that they want articles published in peer-reviewed journals, and they want them respectable, and they will then consider what was being said. But that's the ideal, and that's not really what happens. But in practice what happens is that there is a vast amount of supposed evidence supporting Einstein. When I and others look at this supposed evidence, it looks nonsense. So they've got this pile of evidence which they say have, which supports Einstein, but really we're saying is nonsense. When Einstein is wrong piece of evidence comes along and is submitted to a journal, the journal usually responds by assuming that must be wrong. So they're going to assume an article saying Einstein is wrong, because they are deluded into believing the erroneous evidence they have so far gathered on Einstein, and so they reject the article. So thus a pile of Einstein is wrong articles is prevented from being allowed to accumulate. The pile of erroneous evidence for Einstein is enforced as a dogma. So they've got this pile of evidence which they believe supports Einstein, and it's really an error, but they refuse to consider that possibility, and it becomes a dogma. They say things like this, i.e. they say that one experiment can disprove a theory, but in practice, when they receive such an experiment mentioned to them in an article, they assume it must be wrong because they think they have a pile of evidence saying otherwise. It's the numbers game. Send in one article saying Einstein is wrong, and they say, but we have hundreds of articles saying Einstein is right. Therefore, that one article must be wrong. So that's their thinking process. If you send one article in saying Einstein is wrong, they believe they already got hundreds of articles saying Einstein is right, and so they're already biased and prejudiced against that article. And from our position, who think Einstein is wrong, but it's that one article which is right. The one article saying Einstein is wrong is the right one, and there are hundreds of articles saying otherwise, saying that Einstein is right. Those are the ones that are wrong, and they are preventing the counter evidence from amassing. So from their dogma, they sit on their pile of articles from which they believe Einstein is right, and an article which comes into them which says Einstein is wrong, they don't want to see that. They reject it, and that then prevents them gathering a pile of counter evidence to their beliefs. They're enforcing a dogma. And so physics is a farce, as Dr Bryan Wallace explains. There is the ideal of how physics is supposed to operate, but in practice things are done the opposite way. So we are now going into the adventures of Bryan Wallace, as he explains how he tried to get evidence that Einstein is wrong out into journals. And the book he's got on this is on the internet. It's called The Farce of Physics, and these are the contents. So we now go on to what I think is a significant one, which I want to go on to the significant one. It's the publication politics. I highlight some of the things being said, and other things you'd have to read the article. If we make it a bit bigger, right. Marilyn Vos Savant is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records under the highest IQ and publishes an Ask Marilyn column in the Sunday newspaper magazine Parade. In the May 22nd, 1988 issue, Jennifer W. Webster of so-and-so asked, what one discovery or event would prevent all or most of modern scientific theory wrong? And Marilyn replied, here's one of each. If the speed of light were discovered not to be a constant, modern scientific theory would be devastated. And if a divine creation could be proved to have occurred, modern scientists would be devastated. So that's it. So if the speed of light were discovered not to be constant, then modern physics is pretty much devastated. So if I go to my article, my videos, and I've selected a series on now, the lie on which Einstein's relativity is built. Stop that a minute. I explained about the lie on which Einstein's relativity is built. When they came to actually measure the speed of light, they were unable to find it to be constant, and so what they did is they actually then defined it as constant. So they swapped from a theory where they assume the speed of light constant, and that is under the conditions of being in vacuum and so forth, and for inertial frames, and which would they then test to see whether that was true. They found that theory didn't work, and so they then went to the theory where they defined the speed of light as constant in vacuum and so forth. So that is the little trick they've done. They've actually changed theory. With Einstein, with I think his little face there, with Einstein, his theory in 1905 on special relativity, it is a bit unclear what he means by the speed of light being constant. And if you're taking it to be an assumption, then that theory has been disproved. And really, the theory they're now on is that it's a definition. So there you go. But they're trying to confuse students by trying to make out it is still a theory where you are assuming the speed of light constant. So this is the devastation. If the speed of light were discovered not to be constant, which they're trying to cover up, modern scientific theory would be devastated. And this is what Bryan Wallace says to it. I suspect that Marilyn has hit the nail on the head. Einstein's special relativity theory, with his second postulate that the speed of light in space is constant, is the linchpin that holds the whole range of modern physics theories together. Shatter this postulate and modern physics becomes an elaborate farce. Along with the creation science debate being published in the letter section of Physics Today, there is also a continuing debate on Einstein's relativity theories. My first entry, he's given a citation where that is, into this debate was as follows. This is what he says. I would like to challenge two statements made by Alan D. Allen, that's November, in his reply to Wallace Candle on the question of experimental relativity. Allen states, but Cantor is incorrect in claiming that there is a reliable experiment that refutes special relativity. That's quoted. With regard to this statement, the 1961 interplanetary radar contact with Venus presented the first opportunity to overcome technological limitations and perform direct experiments of Einstein's second postulate of a constant light speed of c in space. When the radar calculations were based on the postulate, the observed computed residuals ranged to over 3 milliseconds of the expected error of 10 microseconds. From the best fit the Lincoln lab could generate, a variation range of over 30,000%. And analysis of the data showed a component that was relativistic in a C plus V Galilean sense. So what he's saying here, from that experiment they are getting Galileo relativity, and in Galileo relativity C plus V is where C and V are non-zero, then that is a greater value than C, and C is the speed of light. So they're getting a value for speed greater than the speed of light from Galileo relativity in this experiment. So with regards to Allen's statement, Einstein's original contribution here was to assume that there is no ether. There is just no ether. That is, no frame r such that one speed with respect to r affects the speed of light. Einstein and Infeld state this word ether has changed its meaning many times in the development of science. At the moment it no longer stands for a medium built up of particles. Its story by no means finished is continued by the relativity theory. So there's utter confusion in the term ether, and it's changed its meaning in the context of which scientists are talking about it. But the point to emphasise is we've got speed of light. We've got a speed here creating the speed of light. It's Galileo relativity. Part of my second letter on this matter goes as follows. Concerning Dermer's comment in choosing appropriate persons to review the numerous manuscripts, the journal editors use various methods that reflect their own style and areas of expertise. I would like to present the following example of how this has worked for me. On 3rd of June 1969, I submitted a paper, an analysis of inconsistencies in published interplanetary radar data, and that was to PRL. The last paragraph of the referee report sent back August 15 stated it is suitable for physical review letters, that's PRL, if revised. So he sent a paper in and they want it revised, and deserves immediate publication if the radar data can be compared directly to geocentric distances derived from optical directions and celestial mechanics. This is what Brian's saying. I revised the paper as the referee recommended and resubmitted it 21st of August. The editor S.A. Goldsmith sent me a reply 11th September in which he stated that the paper had been sent to another referee and rejected. So they were promising to publish his paper, and this paper would have been, as we'll find out, saying that Einstein is wrong. I sent a letter 13th September complaining about the use of the second referee. I received a reply from Goldsmith, that's the editor, on 23rd of September, in which he then stated that he had made a mistake in saying the paper had been sent to a second referee and that it had actually been sent back to the first referee. He did this in spite of the fact that there was absolutely no correspondence between the two reports. They were obviously typed on different typewriters. The first was completely positive while the second was strongly negative and made no mention of the first report. So he had two comments on his paper. The first paper was on a different typewriter to the second comment he got. For the first comment he got a positive response for his article, asking him to rewrite it. He then sent that back. He got a reply on a different from a different typewriter, and it was strongly negative and made no mention of the first report. And he says, I eventually published a revised version, radar testing of the relative velocity of light in space, in a less prestigious journal. So that first journal managed to block him. After promising to publish, they changed their mind. At the December 1974 AAS Dynamical Astronomy meeting, E.M. Standish Jr. of JPL reported that significant, unexplained, systematic variations existed in all the interplanetary data, and that they are forced to use empirical correction factors that have no theoretical foundation. So they've got data which doesn't fit into what Einstein is talking about, and they're forced to do correction factors. In Galileo's time, it was heresy to claim there was no evidence, that the Earth went round the Sun. So in Galileo's time, it was heresy to claim there was evidence that the Earth went around the Sun. In our time, it is heresy to claim there is evidence that the speed of light in space is not a constant. So this is the sort of thing that faces people trying to get these sort of papers into science journals. They're getting blocked. The above unfair treatment I received in trying to publish a paper challenging Einstein's relativity theories is not an isolated incident. As an example, as I mentioned in chapter 6, this is the book, so I'm not in this chapter, in a June 1988 letter I received from a Dr. Savannah Tolchinkinov from the USSR, that's Russia. She wrote that thanks to Perestroikov she was writing me openly. So suddenly Perestroikov, which is openness, it's allowed this lady to communicate with Wallace, Dr. Wallace, but that her Polkov Observatory is one of the outposts of orthodox relativity. So she's at an observatory where they're enforcing Einstein's relativity. And at that place, two scientists were dismissed because they discovered some facts which contradicted Einstein. So she's at a place, and if you find facts that contradict Einstein, you get sacked. It is not only dangerous to speak against Einstein, but which is worse, it is impossible to publish anything which might be considered as contradiction to his theory. So that's what's happening in Russia. They're trying to impose Einstein onto them. Right. It seems the same situation is true for her academy. At least one thinks that this sort of repressive behaviour with regard to relativity theory happens only in the USSR. I have heard or read many horror stories of this happening to scientists throughout the world. To document the nature of the problem within the United States, I would like to make several quotes from a book on this problem from Ruggero Santilli, who is the director of the Institute for Basic Research. So basically, you get, if you're, am I summarising, they're trying to block articles, papers, which are saying Einstein is wrong. So if I go back to my article, where is it? The ideal of how an article should go, you should get peer reviewed and published in a respectable journal. But in the case of Einstein, they are blocking Einstein is wrong evidence from going into the journals. They're just assuming that that can't be correct. So they're just blocking any articles which are bringing up these issues. So there's lots more here explaining the situation. Really, it is politics within the physics community, where the politics seems to be that they don't want people to write articles saying Einstein is wrong, and it's peer pressure to conform to that. So he's got a lot about his adventures of trying to break through this pressure, and he eventually gets to he's complaining to people, and eventually he finds, since then I've been unable to publish any further letters in Physics Today, no matter how important the subject. For example, I made the startling discovery that the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory was basing their analysis of signal transit time in the solar system of Newtonian Galileo C plus V, and not C as predicted by Einstein's relativity theory. So he makes a discovery that a laboratory is not actually using Einstein's relativity, and instead is using Newtonian Galileo theory, and the C plus V for C and V non-zero, that is a speed greater than the speed of light c. So in Einstein's theory it's got to be c as the speed of light, and so the calculations should be done on that, but suddenly this laboratory decided that they should go back to Newton. There is a short mention of the major term in the equation as the Newtonian light time, but no emphasis on the enormous implications of this fact. I tried to force this issue out into the open by submitting a letter to Physics Today, 9th of June 1984, with the cover letter to the editor indicating that I had sent a carbon copy to Moyer at JPL for his comment on the matter. The following is the text of the letter I submitted. So he's trying to point out that they're using Newtonian physics and they're not using Einstein's relativity in this NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And he's finding out they don't want to know that. They don't want to have mentioned in Physics Today. In a letter in the August 1981 issue, I presented the argument that my analysis of the published 1961 radar contact with Venus data showed the speed of light in space was relativistic in the C plus V Galilean sense. So It's talking about Galileo relativity here, not Einstein relativity. And there we get, once again, we have c plus v, where you're meaning you got a speed greater than c, which is meaning speed greater than the speed of light. So that's once again Newtonian Galilean physics, and it's not special relativity. But they're sort of blocking this from turning up in the journals as much as they can. And so it goes on. The fight to try to get this information into the science journals, and they're trying to block it. If we get down. So this is a comment on peer review now, after trying to fight the system which is trying to block people saying Einstein is wrong. Peer review is like communism. It sounds good in theory, but because of human nature does not work very well in actual practice. So you've got the ideal of how it's supposed to work, and it's supposed to work by a peer review, and then you get published, but human nature is the way it is. They block it. If you're saying Einstein is wrong, human nature is to assume your paper must be wrong, and they block your publication. If the APS Council is serious about scientific ethics, they would eliminate the section on peer review and do their best to wean physicists away from this destructive practice in the PR journals. Perhaps they could publish versions of the journal where the authors should be completely responsible for the content of their papers. The journal could reduce costs and response time by having the authors submit camera-ready manuscripts that could be reduced to quarter size, and there would be no reprints. But anyone, including the author, would have the right to make as many copies as they wanted. I suspect that such a journal would flourish and even replace many of the so-called prestigious journals. I would not be surprised to find its format copied by many of the remaining journals, and that this new trend would help resolve the current scientific communication and ethics problems. So he's proposing this peer review system of journals is not working, and he's proposing this method of doing journals instead, because when you send an article in for peer review, you're sitting on these peer reviews are people who are believers in Einstein, and so they're sitting there, they get an article, it comes through, it says this experiment does not agree with Einstein, and they just assume it's wrong, and they won't allow it to be published, and that then prevents accumulation of evidence from experiments that Einstein is wrong. All they sit on is a pile of papers which they think support Einstein, and they will not allow papers to be published which they think which say the opposite. Right. And so like talking about there seems to be a growing willingness of US newspapers to print articles critical relativity theory. So I don't think that's too important to go into. Let me go down a bit more. Science has evolved an elaborate system of social organisation, communication and peer review to ensure a high degree of conformity with existing orthodoxy. So the whole social system of set up for science journals has enforced a dogma, and so he's gone into this a bit more. So he's writing the conclusions to this chapter. So he's complaining a lot about suppression in the physics community. So this is an interesting site which I've seen, and it's this person's called himself a physics heretic, and he's spotted that physics has become like a religion. It says every bad religion needs a good heretic. See if I can make it bigger. Oh yeah, here we go. So get to his comments. I'm sure you are thinking, wait a second, physics isn't a religion. We all wish we were. We all wish that were true, but unfortunately mainstream physics has taken on much of the character of a religion, such as promoting non-scientific principles and spreading its truth as dogma. And that is basically what is happening with Bryan Wallace's adventures in trying to get articles published about Einstein being wrong. He finds himself up against a type of religious dogma from the peer review people. And I found this interesting quote here as a reminder of what's going on. Right. This is Einstein in 1954, and the year after that he died. But he says, Einstein in 1954 was saying, I consider it quite possible that physics cannot be based on the field concept that is on continuous structures. Then nothing remains of my entire castle in the sky, including the theory of gravitation. But also nothing of the rest of modern physics. So in 1954 he's kind of sounding like he's been studying what he started, and it's sort of he's coming to the conclusion it doesn't really make sense. And so modern physics is mostly based upon his miracle year of 1905, and so everything built on that, he's calling it an entire castle in the sky. And so he's now thinking to himself in his final years, he's gone completely wrong. And this ties into sort of things here. Into this little interesting talk by Dr. Edward Teller, who was involved in the Manhattan Project, building the atomic bomb, and he's reporting how he went to a lecture given by Einstein and he didn't understand it and he felt stupid, and then he found out that Einstein didn't understand what he was talking about. And so an interesting quote like that by Einstein in 1954, just before the year before he died. He's thinking, Einstein is even thinking to himself that he's gone completely off on the wrong track. And so that is what modern physics is. It's being built completely on the wrong track, and when it comes to trying to correct physics in this direction, the peer review system is being used to block it. You've got people who don't want to believe that they've made a mistake, as reported by Dr. Bryan Wallace. This is the person here. They've built physics upon what Einstein's been telling them, and they don't want articles to be published saying otherwise. This is Red Cadhill. He's also looking at the evidence for Einstein in finding Einstein is wrong, and he's trying to get published, and he's finding the problem with trying to get published on that as well. I'm finding lots of people who are involved in all this. So people are starting to cotton on that physics is a bad religion. Every bad religion needs a good heretic. And so he's thinking he's a physics heretic, and he's commenting on it, and more and more people are realising that modern physics has gone off onto the wrong track. So I'm in contact with various of these people. So unfortunately, as I say, these people, they go through their physics training process, and by the time they get to the stage of finding out that Einstein is wrong, they are getting quite old, and it's getting pretty late into their working career, and it is sad if they sort of die young. You got people who are living longer to 80 and so forth, and are still fighting the system which is trying to impose on them that Einstein is wrong. But you sort of or also I go through piles of articles about Einstein and so forth. Particularly of interest to me are the ones where they got Einstein wrong. Here's one from New Scientist, and it's sort of called Sacrificing Einstein. It's not really relevant to the part of Einstein I'm talking about, but every now and again you get a little controversy about what Einstein has said, and they then it gets a bit of publicity for a while and then gets forgotten about again. So sort of that one. Einstein has been very influential in physics, and he's made numerous changes into physics. And so when you say, oh, Einstein is wrong, there is a great deal to what Einstein actually did. So what part of Einstein you're saying is wrong? And basically, when you look into it, a great deal of what Einstein did is wrong. So that's it. Thank you. I'll go back to the conclusions things. There is the ideal of how physics is supposed to operate, but in practice things are done the opposite way, and the opposite way is because of people, the human nature, not being able to do science properly. When you've got articles commenting about Einstein being wrong, then there's a reluctance to publish them. You get a block, as people like Dr Bryan Wallace find out.